I realized that I can actually offer some information on Stan's behalf. What we've done in preparation for today was we all spoke, all the panelists had their conversations a week, 2 weeks ago. We went through setting up our framework and what each was going to bring to the table. So I have some information from Stan that I can offer to you guys, and I'd like to do that because the Georgia Resource Center, which again is under the Southern Company, is a zero revenue generating entity, but has brought, I don't even remember his numbers, something like $80 million to the state of Georgia in economic development monies since they've been in existence, which has been a long time. Again, I don't have those numbers. But I asked Stan when we were talking, to describe the role of GIS in what they do at the Georgia Resource Center. And his comment was, GIS is so integrated into the business of the Georgia Resource Center and Georgia Power that where GIS used to be the base of one application, it's now the driver behind most, if not all, of their applications. So there's a full spectrum of utilization from the beginning of a project to the decision-making process and developing the process or the project to the end. And he actually was going to bring some use cases where the Georgia Resource Center saved a company from leaving the state of Georgia based on whatever their business needs were, using the geospatial technologies to present them with some solutions or some information that they didn't recognize was part of the pattern or part of the problem or part of the solution. So I'm going to show you their main website. It's called selectgeorgia.net. And Stan was pretty excited to share this with you because selectgeorgia.net has been online for a long time. But over the past month, they've just released a mobile version of it, and they've simplified it significantly. And part of the discussion, part of the overall theme for Spatial Plexus is how do we as an industry get our tools and our capabilities into the hands of our customers and our customer's customer. So Stan was going to kind of show some of what they're doing to kind of move in that direction. So if you can go to selectgeorgia.net or go to georgiapower.com. Let's see. So the property search goes mobile. Here's where you can actually download the mobile application. And I'm going to try to get to the online application, which this is all GIS driven. And essentially, the Georgia Resource Center helps bring business to the state. So if you've got a Home Depot or a Mercedes wants to put a plant here or whatever, they need so many acres, they need to be within a certain distance of a major interstate, they want a mean demographic of whatever, 35 to 55, and a mean annual salary of a certain amount. So all these decision criteria, and Stan's group, and they've got project managers throughout the state, will help find sites that are suitable for the business needs. So this is the tool that they've developed called selectgeorgia.net. And you can basically identify, what properties are available in which counties that, again, meet a certain size acreage or square feet, the type of property, whether it's an industrial building or an office building. And then they've got some information in here regarding infrastructure, like what sites have water, sewer, gas, that kind of stuff. They consider other social aspects as well, like economic zones, tax incentive zones, environmental justice types of areas. So they're pulling all kinds of information, like Richard said, to make a more meaningful story and provide that context, as well as satisfy the need of the user, which is where can I put my facility, where I'll have the most success. So I just wanted to share this with you, since Stan can't be here. And another point that he and we were discussing during our panel preparation conversation was how these tools and these approaches, GIS is a tool, I agree to that. It's also, it could be argued, a science, geographic information science. But I would argue as well that it's also a process, and it's an integral part of any process when you're talking about place-based analytics. And that's how I kind of like to refer to it anymore. Instead of decision-making support, it's place-based analytics, because it's not just for decision makers, for anybody trying to figure out anything that has to do with location. So Stan was saying that their group kind of looks at parameters from the backside, and they're starting to develop smart search capabilities using this tool for economic development. so that they can identify known requirements from each industry. So for example, if you start with the industry and it's, what were some of the examples he gave? Maybe logistics. You know certain things about that industry, some of their base needs. So you can actually plug that into the tool and get them going faster to find the solutions that they're after. So it's just a little paradigm shift as far as, you know, coming at the problem from a smart approach from the backside first. And that's what I have to report on behalf of Stan Vangilder with the Georgia Research Center. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Carl Anderson, again with Spatial Focus. And Carl's going to, I like our panels, I really like our panels because they represent people from state government and maybe sometimes local government, but also sometimes people from outside the industry that have a use or a perspective that they can bring that's a little different. Carl is a GIS professional and one of the most uber GIS professionals you can know. But he's also got a really good, well-rounded approach as far as what tools are available, again, to the masses so that they can use data and geospatial applications to their own benefit. So Carl's going to show us some tools and some approaches.
So we were talking about, this morning, wicked problems. And we had that talk about showing you tools, but I also wanted to start off with talking about what are the wicked problems in economic development. Just for a show of hands, how many people are economic development professionals here? One. Danielle wears a hat like that too once in a while. Everybody else is a GIS professional. Okay, so we're going to talk about the kinds of problems that are manifesting in economic development around GIS. You alluded to Richard Hammond's story of discussing telling a story. With economic development, you're trying to paint a picture. You're trying to tell a story of why someone should do something. That's the whole thing. All the data supports the story. The story is the thing. The more data that supports a story, the better the story is. And that story is all about location. And if we had Stan's presentation, we would be looking at, he would be looking at the permitting and the physical site issues and the logistics issues. I'm not going to cover consumer issues, but that's certainly out there. What's the demand for this? We're not doing demand forecasting. But I want to start off with some workforce issues. The part about are there people, suppose you put a logistics center out there. There's no drivers within 50 miles. That's part of the equation. That's part of the story. And when we're telling the story, it's all about location. It's all about what's happening there. Again, you call it the place-based analytics. All about the place. But from the GIS standpoint, it's all about the data. I don't know how many of you look at data.gov regularly, the federal data aggregation website. A couple of hands. Big data is a new piece there. Data.gov wasn't big and complex enough. They have to say we're going bigger. There's new data types available every month from the feds, from the states, from NGOs. GIS professionals, we've got to figure out what this stuff is. How do you tell a story with it? Just putting it on a map doesn't tell a story. You've got to figure out what the story goes with. We're getting regularly improved data accuracy. Things are getting closer and closer. Stan's tools predominantly report information at the county level, which is pretty good for parts of Georgia, but for the metro Atlanta area, counties are maybe too big in some ways when you move beyond the bit. And then, big data. And just usability is another problem. At an OpenStreetMap conference in September, so they had a discussion on data accuracy. OpenStreetMap's that free map anybody can edit. So the question is, well, if anybody can edit, is it any good? And they were having a long discussion about data accuracy. And somebody there discussed, we shouldn't be talking about accuracy. That's a false concept. Someone can always have more accurate data. We should be talking about fit for use. Is this data good enough to answer the question we have? Is it good enough to answer to paint the picture we're trying to put together? But a GIS professional also needs to look at data and say, is it ready to use? Is it ready to ask the questions that we have? And I'm going to talk a lot about what's in Stan's presentation because he's not here to defend it. It's easy. They consume a lot of data from a lot of places, but they also make it work together. They don't just grab data, download it, and do something with it. And so preparing the data for use is as big a problem as all the rest of this is. And then the last bit is there a way to do data reuse? If you can do something, can someone else add to the mix? Within the Innovation Center, can I do a mashup, or can I? That's where it gets easier for a professional, but also easier for an economic development professional because they don't have to go through and wade through everything all over again. So these are the challenges that are, I would say ahead, but these are the challenges at foot. And I said every single month are new data products or changes in existing products available from partners, from the feds, from just everywhere, and we're drowning in it. And if we don't know about it, we're not telling as finely detailed a picture as we could tell. So for the GIS professionals in this kind of world, they're looking at things like aggregating data and preparing data. When I started working for Fulton County, I worked with Fulton County Economic Development, Bob Simmons. Anybody know him? Real good guy, real effective economic development proponent. And he would always work with us to get the right story, but we would do a lot of analysis for it. This is, 96, 95, just before the Olympics. We would always do all of the analysis, and we would help him with the story. That's not the world we live in today. You have to have the online web tools. You have to have the tools that the economic development professionals can figure out how to tell the story on their own. Doesn't mean the GIS professionals are going away in this world. They're just swimming with all the data. They're trying to make that data work better. That last line, understanding data limitations, though, is a problem for both people, but more for the economic development people. They may not understand that data has scale issues and fit for use issue, but it may also have holes in it, may not be complete, parcel layer. How much of Georgia has parcels readily available?
Well, about 100 of Georgia's 159 counties has parcels in a GIS format. Whether they're readily available or not is a different question. There are about 45 or 50 of them that are downloadable through the Georgia GIS Clearinghouse. Some of the others you can get directly from the source. Some you can't.
So if you're working with a 3-year-old parcel layer in Grady County, probably okay. If you're looking at a 3-year-old parcel layer for the city of Atlanta, watch out. And it's that problem of, are the decisions, is the story you're trying to paint supported by the data you have? And that's a really big challenge for all of us right now. So within data, I mentioned data timeliness. How old is it? Yes? 2 minutes? Wow. So I'm going to quickly go through pieces. Within the data sets, CTPP, the Census Transportation Planning Package, you use that, right? That has data related to employments in households, how far people journey to work, where people live, where they work. It's got about effectively a 2.5-year lead time. It's always the past. LEHD has that same information, much of it. Misses some of the workers, but is always about 9 months old. So you're trading timeliness for a complete picture. So they could be used together maybe. Quarterly, hello Thea. Quarterly workforce indicators comes out about a national data set talking about workers at the county level. A narrow community survey is available in the 5-year cycle. Blah, blah, blah. So this is just a quick graphic showing information aggregated. This is St. Louis, Missouri. I don't know why I picked that, but that's what's here. Just looking at the healthcare industry in St. Louis, and we're looking at county data. It's kind of muddled. It's not a really clear picture of what's going on. But if we can get deeper into it, this is using LED data, which is released at a block level. It's synthetic data. It's fake data that models reality So you can use it in a modeling sense, but you can't use it to identify an individual. But you can see where the health care workers are very directed, and you can see a better picture than this. And it helps you, so diving into the new data, and not just taking the data you had, but constantly going and looking at what's different. So the example of the improved, is that accuracy? Is this precision? Is it a better picture? I don't know, but it certainly, I think an economic development professional could tell a better story with the one on the right. There's another data product that's just released 2 weeks ago from the Census Bureau that allows you to do a number of analysis. This is canned, I won't go through the bit. This is just showing Perry, Georgia, and the number of workers who live and work in Perry, who live outside of Perry and work inside of Perry, and live inside of Perry and work outside of Perry. So what's this inflow, outflow? And this is limited to the goods producing sector. So it's by sector, what's happening here, where are the workers. So there's new stuff, and I don't know how we all get it, but this is the wicked problem, and it's the best wicked problem to have. There's too much stuff out there, and we just have to find a way to make sense of it all.
So, as Danielle said, first of all, thanks for coming. I am not a GIS professional. It seems like a trend. You got to say that before people start asking me detailed GIS questions. I'm here to talk a little bit about logistics and supply chain and its role in economic development. I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly on economic development and can offer and answer some questions regarding economic development since Stan's not here. The Georgia Center of Innovation for Logistics is an industry-focused component of the state's Department of Economic Development, right? So we're focused on one, I'm a little biased, one of the most important of strategic industries for the state of Georgia, and arguably for really any state, that's transportation and logistics. Specifically getting products to customers, right? Because that's, I don't care what business you're in, if you're not doing that, you're collecting things, and they make TV shows on Discovery Channel about that, not industries. So logistics is important to me, and we do a lot of things. The reason why Danielle, I think, asked us to come is because we use a lot of data to help articulate what logistics means to people that don't understand it, right? Companies like Home Depot and others that understand logistics, but try to articulate and visualize what freight flow and how it's important to their companies. And from a state perspective, what does logistics look like for our state? Carl and I were talking a little bit about data and BTS and different sources of information and what's used, and we use a lot of that different stuff and try to map it and articulate it and visualize it. I'm going to talk about volume, velocity, and visibility, and that was what was the title of the presentation that was in the agenda, and I'll sort of end with that, but I want you to keep those 3 V's in mind, right? Volume, velocity, and visibility, because they're key to logistics. They're also key to economic development. I guess arguably you could say they're important to all businesses, but so let me just start with logistics, and you can use the word supply chain, you can use freight movement, you can use transportation, and it depends on how you look at it. You can use a different word to describe it. But supply chain, I guess a little more broadly than just logistics and transportation, they're complicated, right? And I thought this was important and worth pointing out for a group that is using data to visualize and articulate geographical information. Supply chains are equally as complex, and actually this isn't meant to hurt your eyes, but this is a pretty simplified view, and there's many of them out there of how you can describe a supply chain, but this is a pretty simplified view of what supply chains look like. For example, if you just look at that bottom layer of what most people think about of logistics, and you look at the very center there, you see our ports. There's 361 ports in the United States that move freight, all represented by one simple little square, right? And there's a few lines that are connected to some other places. The transaction and the information layer, and in logistics and supply chain, sometimes that information that we send along is often, and increasingly so, more important than the cargo itself. The financial transactions, the information, the supply chain data that goes along with making sure that box is secure, or that cargo arrives on time, or that the refrigeration was intact. The information about the cargo is sometimes, again, more important than the cargo itself. And then we all need oversight, some of us more than others. And there's just a few of the myriad of federal agencies and also state and other agencies that are out there that are involved in our supply chains. And I say our supply chains because They're complicated and they're also unique, right? Every commodity that we move are different. And that's not how we move poultry anymore in the state of Georgia. But for a guy who runs an innovation center, I mean, what does that mean, right? It's the introduction of something new, and arguably the use of visualizing data is new to the logistics industry. It's certainly new to logistics with regards to economic development, and I promise I'll come to that. But it's doing the best with what you have, right? I mean, and arguably you can look at these pictures and they're doing the best with what they have to accomplish a mission. And those are things that we try to encourage and support and help figure out for the logistics companies that are in the state of Georgia that we work with, help them grow, help them compete, help them be a little more competitive. So what is logistics just from a data perspective? And I'll come to some of the maps and the way we use GIS, again, from a non-GIS professional point of view, but understanding the importance of it. The first thing was, if we're going to run a logistics center, what does logistics look like for Georgia? And I'm not going to quiz you on these numbers, but it is strategic. There's a lot of people that are employed in the logistics industry. If you total them up, about 1 million people are employed in our industry that wake up every day to either provide a logistics service and make $1 off of doing so, or their business is critically dependent on that movement of freight, right? The consumers of logistics. And again, every company really consumes logistics, but these are ones where if you took it out, they wouldn't be able to do their day-to-day operations. Companies like Walmart and Home Depot, for example. But about 44,000 companies, 11,000, and big numbers, right? I mean, lots of companies that are involved in these, and they range in size from 1 or 2 person truck owners and operators to the Home Depots of the world. They range in scale. So you could give those numbers, and I talk to legislators and governors all the time, and okay, that's a big number. They believe that that's important. Well, what does it look like, right? And so going back and forth between just showing a number and articulating it via a picture, via GIS, right, is important for us in showing what the industry looks like. And I use this picture a lot and usually don't talk to GIS professionals, so this is a little daunting for me, but we look at pictures like this and it's usually an eye test, and I say, well, if you squint and tilt your head a little bit, you can see some clusters, and that's true. But importantly, from an economic development point of view, where are there not more dots, right? And I said that right. If you pick out your favorite county, why are there not more dots in other places? Is it a policy issue? Is it an infrastructure issue? Is it is it an industry issue? If we put in a rail spur in one of these counties that don't have as many provider dots, would we be able to attract more companies to be set up shop in that neck of the woods? Maybe. But the picture starts that conversation, right? The numbers are the backing behind it, and the picture starts that conversation in a way that we've never been able to do before. A picture is worth more than 1,000 words in this point. And then I'll show you a few things, and I'll talk about freight flow in a second, but we pull out some interesting statistics that are important to help articulate and showcase what logistics means to Georgia. For example, 81% out of those dots, 81% of the trucking companies have less than 5 employees. Okay, well, who cares, right? Well, they have special needs. If we're going to help them grow their business and we're going to attract and get them into new markets and new customers, we need to understand who they are, and we need to be able to connect with them and understand where they're located, and a whole host of different things that go into economic development. Call that logistics, call that supply chain. It's just typical economic development. So we pull out, extract, and you guys do this every day, right? I mean, you pull a lot of data out of these pictures and share that with people that are looking to get their questions answered. We've gone from just putting it on a PowerPoint slide, which I've done for years now, and put it onto a self-serve, and we're still developing this, a web-based tool. Stan would have showed you some very neat pictures, much better than this, around how they incorporate a lot of other pieces of data into their Georgia Resource Center. We've done it, taken this same sort of dot map, put it onto an interactive map online, frankly, so people don't have to call me so much, and they can go online and kind of generate their own maps and figure out the beginning of that conversation. So when they call me and they want to talk about supply chain and economic development, hey, we want to build a new distribution center or move our manufacturing plant here, they're already a step ahead. They kind of understand what it looks like. And we map out the industry, we map out freight flow, we map out educational institutions, a whole host of different things on our GIS mapping tool here. As a segue into freight flow, and this is just a little factoid, I think it's interesting. Hopefully you will as well. By the year 2050, if you pick your favorite economist, your favorite statistician, we have about 100 million, we're going to add about 100 million more people onto our population here in the US, not in Georgia. We have about 300 million people now, we're going to add about 100 million more. Surveys show, studies show, that makes it true, we have on average about 40 tons per person into the system, right? So we're going to add about 4 billion more tons of freight onto an already pretty taxed network. How do we do that? This goes back to that volume, velocity, and visibility, which I'll get to. 4 billion more tons. Tom talked about T-Splost and the transportation referendum coming up. That is our plan A for solving some of the transportation-related issues here in the state of Georgia. We don't have a plan B. We want to be prepared to handle the movement of freight, the movement of more people as those populations grow. As our economies grow, more cargo will come. We want it to come here. So how do we do that? Well, to start that conversation, just like we would do with industry, what does it look like? Here in Georgia, we've managed the freight flow data for the state and for the Department of Transportation and others. This comes off a database called TransSearch, if you're familiar with freight mapping data. And you can look at the big red lines, and we dive into this in much greater detail, and I'll do that in a second. But usually what I point out here is, yeah, you can see that a lot of stuff that runs north-south, and I won't get into why. But if you look behind that, the orange lines, which aren't really easy to see, it flows everywhere, right? So the flow of freight is moving all over the state of Georgia. It is critical to what we do, and there's a lot of companies, as I showed you before, that depend on that freight flow. So it's a map and it's a picture, and we use that a lot to show at a county level what that freight looks like. And similar tool, the same tool that I showed you before, we also then take that static PowerPoint picture that I've used for years, and now we use it on a self-serve tool. So you can zoom into your county, map this in correlation with where the industries are, and you can start making your own decisions about and your own assumptions about where you might want to set up shop or develop your economy, right? Just like I told you, the 81% from the trucking companies have less than 5 employees. From a freight flow perspective, the most expensive thing to ship is air. Not by air, but shipping air. Empty containers, empty movements, truckers that aren't really moving any cargo, but they got to get back. Here in the state of Georgia, we parse the data, and we have about 12, this is 2007 data, and I purposely leave the old data up there because it's gotten, I'll say, worse. But 12 million empty moves on our roads, taxing our roads, for no apparent purpose, right? 12 million empty movements. How do we do that? How do we eliminate some of that? That's part of the conversation that we want to start. So I'll close by talking a little bit about these 3 V's that I promised I'd talk about. From an industry perspective, if you're in the logistics business, if you're in the economic development business, the more companies you can locate, the more freight you can move, and I'll sort of go back and forth between the two, the more successful you'll be, right? Move more stuff, make more money. Well, unfortunately, it's not quite that easy, right? You've got to do it at the right pace, at the right velocity. Everybody wants to do it faster, better, cheaper. That's not always true, but doing it at the right velocity to make it the most cost effective is that second V. So you want to move more stuff, you want to do it at the right velocity, and then, I think important to this group, you've got to have the right visibility. I've shown you a few examples of how we do it here in the state of Georgia and some tools that we use, but having the right visibility to know where your customers are, but also know where your boxes are, being able to track it, and GIS and mobile technologies play a whole different sort of role when we talk about tracking cargo between Shanghai and Savannah, for example. So volume, velocity, and visibility are important to the industry side. And then if I take that over to the infrastructure side and what a state does, well, do we have the right capacity to handle that volume? We talked about T-Splost. How do we keep up the roads at the place they need to be? Do we have the right capacity from a velocity perspective? Do we have the capabilities? Are the roads capable of moving at the pace that industry wants to move it? And then finally, connectivity. Do we know where that cargo wants to go? The visibility from an industry perspective I talked about, but having the visibility into where that cargo wants to end up, that connectivity, so that we can build the right infrastructure to be able to move it and connect it where the industry wants to place it is critical. So volume, velocity, and visibility matching up with those 3 C's on the infrastructure side are critically important. And you can't do it with just a number. You've got to have the pictures, and GIS is a critical tool that we use to make that happen. The last comment, and this is one of my favorite quotes, and I try to use it often, it's not easy, right? And Thomas Edison said, opportunity is often missed because it's dressed in overalls and looks like hard work. Doing some of these things, convincing folks that logistics and supply chain and infrastructure improvements are important, doesn't happen overnight, but pictures sure make it a heck of a lot easier.
Thank you, guys. Now it's your turn. I think Barbara, you had a question, right?
I actually did have a question.
Ingram, thanks.
For Stan.
Oh.
Oh, I better put my mic. My question is, you talked about the vote that's coming up, and you talked about how, you know, when Tom asked us how we would vote on it, would we want more public transportation? Would you want HOV lanes, or would you want no change and the taxes impacted by it? If you had a model that showed me how this vote would impact the trucking world or the logistics of how we get our goods, and I could go play with it online and say, gee, if I vote yes, this is going to happen. If I vote no, this is going to happen. And then how it affects my commute and whether we have other options. Could we make the truckers go off hours? Or if I had a way of understanding that discussion other than my gut reaction of never build more roads, use public transportation, I think we could have better communication.
Using the tools for cause and effect
Right. Yeah, that's a great point.
scenario.
We could definitely use more tools like that. We could use it before July 31st, those tools. That's when the vote is. Yeah, I mean, there's been some predictions, there's some maps, and you know, what the freight flow is now, what the commuter patterns are now, what it'll be in the next 10 years, which is what the tax covers is the next 10 years, and it's specific with this project. The only thing I'd add is that, you know, that it's complicated, right? And it's not just commuters, it's not just people movement, it's mixing together. He asked, you know, light rail and express lanes. We didn't talk about, you know, freight lanes and other places. And every county's got a different list of projects. Some are more freight related, some are more commuter related. So a wicked problem, right? I mean, how would you model that?
But again, fit for use. For me to make a
Agreed.
decision,
Yep.
give me some data that tells me what the impact of my decision is.
Agreed.
Isn't that slightly dangerous for a state agency potentially influencing legislation, but also trying to wear a Sears hat? You're trying to decide if you had the money, what would you do with it? There may be some risk involved in that.
True. I mean, well, for this specifically, that money was obligated to a specific list of projects that a committee came up with per county, per region. So it's not if we have a pot of money, this is what we think we do with it. It was those projects were decided on by county, which I guess would make it easier to model. But I don't know. Okay.
Well, sure, because no.
Right, you've got the projects and you could really, yeah. Point. I don't know if I answered your question. That's what I talked about.
A question for Carl. Wonder if you could comment on the wicked problem of the United States House of Representatives and the potential implications for economic development of the proposed cancellation of American Community Survey, among other acts of mischief.
Heard of me. Peter Folger is here with the Congressional Research Service, and if you, I mean, I'll let Carl answer that, but if you want to add anything, please feel free. Go ahead, Carl. Go ahead, Carl. Why doesn't Carl will go ahead and then you can add to that.
Dave, I wanted to speak to your phrasing. It's probably inadvertent. I think we are very blessed to have a U.S. House of Representatives and have been for quite some time.
Depends on how you look at it.
They've done more good than bad.
Scale.
Yeah.
Zoom in, zoom out.
That's right, yeah.
There's some discussion within the current budget crisis of trying to cut programs that are ineffectual to make either the American Community Survey voluntary or eliminated in its entirety, and to defund elements of other surveys at the U.S. Census Bureau, which would effectively make the economic census would not be able to be conducted. Some things, a lot of government and a lot of governance is built around these statistics, and the American Community Survey goes back over 200 years. That it's not a new thing that we've been doing. Knowing what population is and what they're doing is important to governance, and I think that's the best way to leave.
I don't know this topic actually that well. I just heard about this at this meeting, as a matter of fact. But just to sort of clue you into the congressional process, which many of you are familiar with, if this was enacted by the House, well, there's always the Senate, and the same bill has to be passed over there, and if they're not identical, then they have to be reconciled in conference. So, in a sense, this gives you all and others the opportunity to make your views known for the next stages of the process. And that's the democratic process. So, you know, I encourage you to weigh in if you feel strongly. And by the way, they are your representatives, so you know, we can blame them, but they represent you.
Dave, stand up and be counted. I want to make a comment because I represent the National States Geographic Information Council. I'm on the board of NSGIC, and we've got 2 board members from ERISA. Anybody else here from the ERISA board? ERISA is the Urban Regional Information Systems Association Information Officers and statewide coordination, whereas ERISA generally is more focused on local government GIS practitioners and local government coordination. Both of those organizations, in addition to, actually I didn't think it didn't go through COGO, both of those organizations have written a letter to Congress asking that the American Community Survey does not go away, in addition to the funding that's being proposed for cut in support of census activities. So we don't know where that's going to go, but I just want you all to know that that your representatives in the GIS community are at least putting those types of things in writing. And if you would like a copy of either of those letters, please let me know and I can get you a copy. You can repurpose that, reuse that information, and send it on to your representatives. Other comments, questions, thoughts? We have half an hour to fill this space. Go on, Richard. You'll take up the next 10 minutes, I'm sure.
So a couple of y'all have been in, you know, I always have something to say, but Carl's point about fit for use, that's really driving it. What I'm trying to get around to is that, okay, by allegory, when I was in high school, I drove a Volkswagen to school, and my buddy, a little bit of age on me, but my buddy drove a brand new yellow GTO every day. I mean, this is a great car. However, we both got to school at the same time. So the point being is that even though we can do all these fantastic things with our technology, often it's important, not often, it's always important to think about why it is that we're going to use those tools and what the end use of that particular tool is. So I would make that plea. And then also, I'm a little hesitant to say, but I heard a story the other day about this Mexican cement company that's become the largest cement company in the world. And the way that they are organizing their trucks these days is they fill them all up with cement in the morning and they send them out. And they wait for the calls to come in. So they don't try to organize their day. They don't try to direct their system so tightly. They just send them all out and wait for the calls, and then a truck will be nearby. And they go and fulfill it, and they've become the largest company in the world doing that. So these emergent systems, I'm hesitant to say that because I don't know the whole story, but I think I heard it on NPR. It must be true, right? So the data, you know, accuracy is really an interesting thing because we deal with it all the time, and yet, depending on what viewpoint you look at, you know, what scale of level you're looking at, the accuracy appears or disappears with the same exact data. So that's what I have to say about that.
I'd like to fill in, because I think, again, we can make some connections between accuracy and maybe some other conversation that will surface regarding authoritative data. And, you know, a lot of times people need and want authoritative data, meaning, you know, the best source of the information upon which to propose a solution or a decision. And there's a big question about that too, you know, like is OpenStreetMap data authoritative or not? And some would argue that it's not because it's not maintained by anybody with accountability, but then others would, because it's not maintained by an entity, it's the public, you know, providing input. But then others would argue that it's probably more authoritative than an independently owned data set because you've got people corroborating that this park bench is actually where, you know, the first person said it was. 15 more people have identified a park bench in that exact location or a MARTA station or whatever.
Also process transparency. So process transparency means you know who did what when, and when you look at agency data, frequently it's just a snapshot in time, this is our best efforts, and it doesn't show you how they were fixing things or who was doing things. So you lose that bit of how did this come to be, and that bit of process transparency can give you a lot of confidence in the data. stuff in any data set.
Well, and again, I think it boils, and the reason I brought this up is because I think it relates back to fit for use and accuracy. So do you have to have the most authoritative data set, and how do you define what is a more authoritative data set versus another similar data set? And the question, ultimate question is, like you said, Richard, what's the end use, what's necessary to get there, and does this data set fit the need?
Sometimes, give a choice of, come back to an example I lived through working for Fulton County. Fulton County provides sewer and water services to select entities outside of the bounds of Fulton County. Every county water and sewer system, almost everyone does. But when you define the authoritative bounds for the sewer system, you always crop it to the county boundary, frequently do. And so now you're caught with this problem of, well, what do you do with the stuff that's outside the authoritative boundary? And
It doesn't exist.
well, it'll creep up and get you every once in a
Oh, yeah.
while if you don't count them properly.
Mhm.
So I was interested in your comment about data, and earlier in a session there was a comment about fitting the data, and I actually have the
Opposite issue. I would like to thicken the data. I would like to have the discrete information that I need to make decisions that are different for different people, for different locations. So for instance, looking at sort of like the long tail of Google, right? I'd like to know for these locations, what's the road condition? But for these locations, what's a different road condition? I'd like to make decisions based much deeper rather than waving my hand and say, everyone will do this, or we will plan it in this way. So I actually want to add more and more layers of information. And I don't really care if I have people's names, but I want some level of accuracy and different level of accuracy for each piece of information, for each database.
Each row.
And not just accuracy, metadata, I think, is what you mean, right? Like information about who originated the information and how.
what the security is,
Yeah.
when we got it, what its life is, when the snapshot was taken.
Just below that fit for use on accuracy was that usability and process for usability. If you wanted all that information and tried to push it to one of these, maybe your life wouldn't be so good.
Right.
But if you're going to do back office analysis, that stuff it's really helpful to get. And so making sure that you're managing your information assets in a way that when they're presented to the website tools, they're ready for that. When you have other copies or other versions of the data support other uses.
And I think what we're going to find is we've been mostly talking about public sector and public services. And I think what you're going to find over the next 5 to 10 years is you're going to spend a lot more time looking at the private sector. I think you're going to see that the overlap between a cement company sending out trucks to everywhere and a taxi cab company that no longer wants to use taxi stands but will position people and then use a distribution point to get there is going to be similar to all the location-based services I get on my iPhone, and they know where I am. And so I think retail and sports and entertainment and services are going to start hiring GIS people by the droves.
I'm gonna, again, cause a pause. I am very, again, pleased about all of the contributions from the audience and the dialogue that we have going. It's fantastic. It's better than I would have expected. But we can see what's happening where we have the 2% of the vocal people expressing their opinions and the rest of the room that's just kind of withdrawn. And I don't want to call people out. That's probably not the right approach. But I would like to invite those of you whose wheels are spinning but your mouth isn't moving to share your thoughts with us. I would like to hear from some folks that we haven't heard from so far. And thank you for stepping up. I know it's not easy for some people.
Hey Danielle, when you get an invitation, you always respond. I'm Dave Skiles from Denver, Colorado, and the wicked problem that I'd like you to address is a what-if problem. What are the logistic considerations with respect to an event that you did not anticipate? And how do you think geospatial can be used to tactically address the logistics of a severe weather event or other severe weather event?
Good question. Who wants it?
You know what, I can give you a parallel. When we had the drought, 08, federal government gave all the counties money to go through a thought exercise, a planning exercise to determine how they would implement a total water ban and distribute bottled water to all of the residents of the metro area every day. And the logistics around that, setting up those centers, stocking them several times a day with water and bringing in water every day, was very, very substantial amount of planning and changing the way that things were set up. We have to make roads one way, some roads have to be set up as being exclusively for the logistics of bringing the water in. So it has to be done ahead of time before you can really use it for tactical. You can plug in the parameters of the event, but if you haven't done lead work, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, so I mean, when I talk to companies, we talk about supply chain reliability and supply chain sustainability. You know, if you're a large manufacturer, you're building airplanes, for example, you might have 1,000 suppliers. Well, how many of those? Well, first of all, does that large manufacturer, just hypothetically, does that large manufacturer know and have planned for things like tsunamis and earthquakes and nuclear meltdowns? Well, no. When they reach out to those first layer of suppliers, and I'm building something here, when they reach out to that first layer of suppliers and say, okay, well, you know, is this natural disaster going to impact how are we doing? Are we okay? Are we going to be able to get all our parts? Oh yeah, we're good. Well, that was fast. How do you know? And have you talked to your tier 2, tier 3, tier N type suppliers? You know, that thickening of the data from a sustainability and a reliability point of view is not happening. I spoke at a conference 2 weeks ago with Amway, a large company, that talked about how they're building that process themselves, just to call them out. I mean, they have a lot of suppliers, a lot of moving parts. So, you know, are people going to start building nuclear meltdowns into their supply chain planning process? No, but that's not the point, right? The point is to be able to get down to that deeper layer and being able to visualize that. We're actually working on a project to visualize some of those tier N type supply chains, and from an economic development point of view, you know, you start looking at where your suppliers are located, you get sustainability and reliability benefit, but you might also be able to have some transportation benefit cost analysis as well. You know, if I move this cluster of suppliers to Georgia, just saying, if we moved it to Georgia, would that be able to save you money? Why would you do that? There may be good reasons why they can't, but having that conversation and having that data at your fingertips has to be built, has to be thickened, because it doesn't exist at a very corporate level so far, we found.
I'm sorry, Nancy, just a minute. We had another question from over here first.
Hi, Ann Johnson, Geotech Center. And two thoughts came to mind, and they're kind of opposite, but we attended the University Consortium for Geographic Information Science summer meeting, and Carl Steinitz from the Harvard School of Graduate Design mentioned that good data was good enough if it fit and gave you an answer to a question in a cost-benefit sort of manner. So that sometimes, you know, the student wants every bit of data they could ever see, and it has to be 100% correct, accurate, whatever. But sometimes you can get a good answer that's good enough with just good data. But it was a really good presentation. I think David was there, and I thought it was really informative. The other thing is intriguing about having some sort of geospatial answer to a political question like we had this morning. I was a member of the League of Women Voters for years, and we looked at a lot of the propositions, and we would give both sides to the answer. It would be interesting if we could have something like that was you know, a non-political aligned to a state government or federal government that could look at something and give a, you know, what is the cost benefit of different options, those questions.
Nancy, I know you're next, but if you don't mind, I again want to make some connections between the different comments. One is a bit of information that is the U.S. Senate has recently established a GIS working group. This is within the past quarter, which is great news, I think. Another bit to get back to your question about what if scenarios and how does GIS or the geospatial approach to, how does it affect us when there's a natural disaster? What do we do about that? Just another nugget, the state of Georgia actually was trying to pass a policy a couple of years ago that would require the counties to submit a list of properties that fell within the flood zones. And that affects everybody in the room, no matter which state you live in, because you either are paying for flood insurance or you're not. The counties resisted that because, as you heard me say a minute ago, 30% of counties in Georgia don't have their property databases in an electronic format. If you do, you can overlay that with the floodplain zones and you can spit out a list in 5 minutes. If you don't, you're tasked with trying to figure out what addresses fall along a certain segment of road throughout the entire county. So that bill actually got hijacked and we created the Georgia Geospatial Advisory Council. And we did an audit of geospatial capabilities across the state. But unfortunately, what happened, I mean, Carl was talking about the drought in 2008, which was followed by a flood in 2009, and $500 million of property loss was realized just in North Georgia alone. And this is because these are properties, commercial or residential, that didn't have flood insurance, that needed it, but they didn't know they needed it. And you have the alternative happening where people are paying premiums for flood insurance and they don't need to. So there's another example in North Georgia where the state of Georgia, we just use the United States Geological Survey 10-meter digital elevation model. And we do our flooding modeling based on that, which is not, again, very accurate for setting flood insurance rates, again, fit for use. So Hall County in North Georgia and Towns County, several other counties along the coast, have paid to have higher resolution elevation data created, to the effect that in just one area along Lake Lanier, $10 million worth of home insurance premiums were saved over the next 10 years because the people who were identified as being in a floodplain with the 10-meter accurate data elevation model were now removed from that floodplain with the more accurate data. I can show you examples if you care to see it, but so I mean, it's like a chicken and an egg thing. If you're not proactive, you don't have what you need as a base framework, as a county, as a company, as a state. You realize a natural disaster, you realize that you're spending too much money on gas by sending trucks out, you know, that aren't being optimized, routes aren't being optimized, and then you do something about it. Or you have something happen, unfortunately, and then you react to it. That's just kind of some examples, but I think Nancy had a comment and then we'll come back to you, John. And I know, Nancy, you might have been commenting on something from 10 minutes ago. You want to pick it back up? Okay.
John Young from Esri. I think that something to add maybe to this topic, if you're going to develop it in the future, which I think we're hearing a big theme of, is risk management and how it is introduced. And that's, you know, I was going to actually make a point to you, one you just made. I don't know if you guys are familiar with NOAA's National Climatic Data Center, but they have, like, I think every couple years, a conference that's kind of devoted to different industries and getting feedback on the kind of data they should be providing. I've actually been to it once. It's very, very informative. But they have, and they address that whole insurance industry, right? It's just sort of an anecdote there, or a side note. But I think introducing risk management is a really important step there because obviously it impacts, it's the whole mitigation of risk, right? And the application of GIS to do that, to up front try to do as much predictive analysis as we can, and then at the same time know that we've built in those controls or those analyses for those ad hoc on the fly things that are gonna happen, that are gonna require us to reroute and do things like this in the supply chain.
And if you guys are watching, I'm kind of keeping a mind map going throughout this conference. I have Dave DiBiase's keynote, just a couple of points from his keynote this morning, one of which was, what's the moral ideal for the GIS profession? And I think we just heard a great example of that, which is risk management and societal, you know, the benefit to society, predictive analysis and cost savings, but life savings as well. Another question or thought? Go ahead, Thomas.
Tom Mueller. This is the first time I've ever needed a microphone. I was born in South Jersey, so normally I don't need one. you know, we talked a lot about economic issues and different situations like that. There are 2 points I'd like to make as from the education side. We want to be able to produce for your future employees the best employee possible. So I would ask 2 things, and it comes to one of your points as far as data. We use a lot of public data. I would like to know how you use that public data to get the answers or to answer the questions that you're trying to answer, because then as an educator, I can go about and start to build lessons or have students think that way or watch the process go. Number 2 is a little more dicey, and that is the sharing, at least for educational purposes, of private data. Not that, you know, I have students, we have deals with certain companies that we will let us use their data, and we promise to only be educational use, students deleted everything. But that way, when students go out, they can say, you know, I never really hacked around with pipeline data, but we did use it in this, and I know these are the attributes that are important, and these are the types of things. So I know this is about economic development from an education side, hoping to get you better employees down the road, to please consider those 2 issues.
So there wasn't a question there, was there? Okay, good comments though. Other thoughts?
Hi, Allison Linkett-Mizan from Foothill College in the San Francisco area, and to kind of further on that idea, one of the issues that we run into as educators is access to data, and it seems like one of the thoughts that has been brought up with these wicked problems is a lack of people to munch on these problems and to come up with interesting, creative solutions. And as educators, we have classrooms full of young, creative minds. So would there be a possibility of having some sort of national clearinghouse of these major problems with data sets as well? Because that is another issue that we run into as educators, is within our quarter or semester system, how do you amass a data set for this great idea that a student has come up with? So I don't know how to organize this. I don't know who would be behind this, but I'm thinking, for example, supply chain problems. A tsunami in Japan caused major issues for a lot of manufacturers. You have major weather-related issues. That data is out there, and we have a lot of creative minds who could put forward potential solutions.
I just pulled up a website that Carl referred to earlier, data.gov. Most of you probably are familiar with it, but just to point you to this resource, you may file your electric bills by month. Somebody else might file their electric bills by electric bills and their water bills by water bills. So organizing information is really a subjective activity. But you can find most of what you need, I think, on data.gov to use in your classroom. So if you look under the data section, you can get to raw data or geodata, and you can search basically on categories. Like you can just type in, oops, what happened? Did I just lose my web address? Oh. You can type in water, which is a wicked problem. It's a finite resource, and we've got to figure out how to best manage it, best deal with issues related to water. Just type in water, and you'll find all kinds of results when you go to this. And you can go to Esri's GISonline.com website. There's plenty of data out there. I think that's another point that's been made, is there's so much information. Now we just have to figure out which information do we need and how do we use it, but does that answer your question or help get you further along with supporting your students? And every state has a state GIS clearinghouse, I think with very few exceptions. So you can just Google Tennessee GIS clearinghouse or North Dakota GIS clearinghouse, and you'll find state data as well. Not all the states feed their data into data.gov. So again, sometimes you might not find everything you're looking for on data.gov and you have to go to the source. But hopefully that helps.
Just a comment, maybe a question. Is it more the questions you're looking for the 2 educators that made comments?
Yeah.
Are you looking for those supply chain questions that need to be answered?
Good.
Because it seems like the data's out there. Right. Where do you point those questions at, and then the awareness of it?
Exactly. I know I can do the search for Pennsylvania Spatial Data Access. That's our clearinghouse. Right. Go under geodata.gov to get it. Okay, here's the data. I have an idea about how the process works to get the final answer.
That's great.
that I can then utilize in my class and get a discussion going with students.
How much do you, not to go back and forth here, but how you have other professors in your university? I mean, how much do you interact with other professors that are specialists in supply chain or manufacturing? And then also on the industry side too, how many times have you brought them into?
If I had those connections, I would bring those
Okay.
those situations. My business professors are more than willing to come in, but again, it's that third party, it's that industry to come in
Right.
and help us really come together as a community.
I think that's great.
Yeah, interacting with industry is key, right? I mean, that's the answer. Is get the industry folks to come in and tell you what those problems are. Might be specific to their company, but I think you'll find that it flows like resiliency and others.
Danielle?
Yes.
Dave Skiles, there's a powerful, really powerful resource that collects not only the definition of the problem, but the data and potential solutions across a wide variety of disciplines. And here comes the commercial, David. It's at ESRI, and
Yeah.
it's called Spatial Labs. I heartily recommend that you check that out. We got a chance to work with it during its development, and it is substantial, and it's ready-made for the classroom.
That's great. Any other burning comments? Otherwise, I'm gonna wrap it up here for a minute. Okay. I want to review the takeaways with you guys. Make sure that I've just been documenting stuff as we've been talking, but I want your consensus on this, please. I need it actually to make sure that we move forward as a group. So I'll highlight number one, all the data support a story or stories. So data is only relevant really if you can tie it to the story or to the business need. And data are all about location. So what we need to do is determine what is the story or what is it we're trying to describe. Any variation on that? You want to see me modify it in any way? Next highlight, is accuracy a real issue? Because this is something that the GIS community and GIS data or geodata users have talked about for a long time, but are we on point with that controversy or that discussion? Is accuracy a real issue? Or should the discussion be more about data that's fit for use? And what's the end use so that we can determine what's necessary to get there? Any modifications of that one? Highlight number 3, process transparency is often lost with authoritative data. And then maybe there's a better way to word this, so let me know if you have a better way to summarize that. But I wanted to highlight that the process transparency is almost as valuable to the end user as a database itself.
Can be.
Can be.
Again, if you want to put the data on the phone, all that extra stuff might just get in the way.
Can you guys read this? It's getting smaller the more stuff I put in here. Highlight number 4. Well, this was me. I mean, I didn't actually hear this comment, but this is me kind of inferring. So let me know if you agree or don't agree. But I heard a guy from ERDAS talk about supply chain and how it's missing from the GIS profession. So you create data, and there's, all data has a life cycle. But getting data into an application or into an environment that's useful to the consumer, that the consumer can get to with 3 swipes or 1 click or whatever you want to call it, easy access, it doesn't really exist in our profession. So I kind of described that as supply chain is absent from the geodata perspective. Drilling down to tier N is not always possible. Go ahead if you want me to rewrite that.
I wouldn't say that it's absent, I'd say it's silent, right? I mean, it's drilling down to tier, it is possible, it needs to be done, but it's a competitive advantage. I mean, the reason why Walmart doesn't put their supply chains out there, you look at some of the freight flow data, Piers, large company, right, that collects freight export data. Walmart masks, they're allowed legislatively to mask their name out of that database. You can't find out what Walmart's moving on purpose, because it's a huge competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to know, they don't want Kmart to know when they ship suppliers from Vietnam to India. That's a huge shift. So it's the stuff that is missing is on purpose, and it can be drilled down to tier N. It's just not being done, and when you do it, it's going to be of a company like that.
Okay.
That aerospace company is going to drill down and find theirs, but it's not something you can do
That's
it's
one way to
different.
look at it, actually, but I was coming from another point of view, which, and again, I'm relaying information that I heard from
You
the
know,
ERDOS president.
But that statement 4, to me, feels a little bit like a discussion on the question about event-based processing.
Yeah.
That you have to practice, you have to do them as exercises before you can go and do them, especially when there's more than one moving part, like when there's more than one commercial entity involved. And if you want to use it in emergency management during a disaster, you have to practice ahead of time.
I think it gets back to some of the initial comments on prototype pilot that were made earlier this morning. In terms
Okay.
of wicked problems and how we address them.
Refresh our memory, just to articulate it more clearly.
Let me go back. Some notes on it. Thought it was actually pretty good. Yeah, prototype, pilot, iterate, right? The solutions, right? To make sure that, in terms of better or worse.
Yeah, I liked better or worse versus right or wrong. Mm-hmm.
But I think one thing that I kind of disagree with a couple of those things, and that is that, you know, in the guy from Denver brought up, John, the point about an emergency is that it's like a neural network. It's like things will develop. So in Jefferson County, Colorado, when the wildland fire escaped from the preventive burn, nobody prepared for that, and 2 people died because the 911 center didn't know where the old people had called in from and said, it's fine, stay in your house. And their house was overtaken 5 minutes later, and they died. But what filled in the gap there was like a neural network. It was Twitter, it was Facebook, it was social media that jumped in. I mean, I'm sitting at my desk in South Carolina, and somebody calls and says, Nancy, do you know where the parcel data for Jefferson County is? And I said, yeah, it's sitting right here on my hard drive. He said, we gotta have it. You know, I mean, it's like you have these neural networks that evolve through the social community. And so it's almost like it'll find, in a times of emergency, it'll kind of find its path, right? I mean, when you have a completely unexpected event, people jump to Joplin, Missouri was what, 3 years ago today? What, 2 years ago today? I mean, you saw that people jumped into the void, right?
That's one area we haven't talked about is adding social media information with location information,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to be an emergency response, some of our most critical data.
That's actually a really good point. I know that, and his name is going to escape me. The guy's the head of DHS. Come on, John. Yeah, Craig Fugate. You know, he was on our stage at our federal conference a couple years ago, not this past year, but the year before, showing the advent of the addition of social media to their maps because they realized the benefits, right, that it can provide. There's another thought I was just ready to provide, but it escapes me, so.
No, that's right. They're planning for that, right? They count on that happening.
Microphone, we can't hear
Oh.
you, I'm sorry.
I mean, they almost plan, that's how they almost plan for the unexpected anymore, is they plan that the social media is gonna step into the void. I mean, the Arab Spring, I mean, that's become our new reality.
And not too much of a promo here, but I mean, that's why when you look at the advent of moving GIS technology to the cloud and providing systems like our GIS Online and the ability to contribute to that, and in a private or a public setting, a private organizational setting, let alone, in other words, members of that organization, that's why that's speeding up so quickly, because putting out VGI or volunteer geographic information, let alone some of the social media inputs, are all built into that fabric. They're required, they're a part of it you can tap directly into.
Okay. I'm going to move on to highlight 5. I thought this was a really key point that we can take away from this session, and that's the geospatial approach is critical to risk management, and risk management is critical to our society. And possibly, again, this is a moral ideal, one of potentially many for our profession. Does anybody want to rework that at all? Anybody not agree with that? Highlight 6, access to data in support of workforce development plus education is important. But I think more importantly, and we kind of flesh this out, is that educators need the questions from the industry so that they can arm the students with the approaches that will be necessary when they enter the workforce. So I don't have any answers for that, but I'm thinking, you know, we've got a data repository at a state level, local level, sometimes regional levels, federal level, national level, I should say. Why not have a repository of questions? Just a thought. Anything else that really stood out to folks that I need to document before we break for lunch? Go ahead.
Have one comment about increasing industries' availability of GIS professionals that are sensitive to business needs would be to increase participation, advocating GIS education in business school.
Can you repeat that last part one more time, please?
Increase participation of industries advocating GIS education in business school. So that there's more interest in students becoming GIS savvy.
Not just business schools, but think of all the disciplines.
Public policy,
Yeah, multidisciplinary
logistics.
encouragement.
Is it a natural thing for geology, environmental, you know, to include GIS, but I think there's not as much pushback from industry towards education to say, hey, put a GIS class in there.
I would just like to second that idea. And right now, the educational system is still based on the ancient Greek system of the quadrivium and the trivium. You know, you learn the mathematics and language and arts and this, that, and the other. And GIS as a tool has become a across-the-board literacy issue, as some people have pointed out. It needs to find its way into the core curriculum
Yes.
in the first 2 years of college, such that as students learn the content, they learn to integrate the tool along with the content by the time they graduate, as opposed to many institutions had the Intro to GIS course as a senior level course, so they learned all the content and they learned the tool right at the end, and then they have to figure out the integration on their own.
That's a great point. One more comment, and then we're going to break for lunch.
I just want to really emphasize that number 6, that synergy between education and the business and government world. If there were a repository for real world problems that educators could access, you could, number one, improve education, because when students are working on real world problems, it absolutely orders of magnitude improves the quality of instruction, and we could be providing solutions to or at least potential solutions to wicked problems. I think we could look back today and say this is the day that a really powerful idea was born.
Great. Okay,